Hello everyone, this is Chidanand from Kratz Infotech NG. Welcome to this short tutorial on two important Docker topics. Especially if you're new to Docker, you will find these two topics of utmost importance to you. The first one is a small utility called Play with Docker. For those of you who tried installing Docker, especially on Windows, you'll find that a little bit of a problematic scenario because Docker needs some sort of an hypervisor. And if you're not comfortable with installing hypervisors or running hypervisors on your laptop, you will find Docker installation a little bit painful. There is a beautiful utility available on the web pretty much free of cost. All that you got to have is a Docker Hub credential. So if you have a Docker Hub credential, I will show you how to use this utility to not just spin up a simple Docker, single instance Docker sandbox, but also at a click of a button, I can also bring up something called as a Docker swarm, a little complicated Docker exercise as well. Everything pretty much free of cost on the web without really installing anything on your local laptop. The second one is an alternative to Docker Desktop, Portainer, a very wonderful utility. Again, installation of this is also super simple because it's all about pulling a Docker image and kind of running a container, which will give you a beautiful UI through which you can pretty much do whatever Docker tasks that you would want to achieve without really having got to remember the actual Docker commands. In order to use Play with Docker, all that I got to do is open up a browser and then search for something called Play with Docker. The first URL that you're going to hit is this particular utility, which needs a Docker Hub credential. So in order to play with Docker or use this utility, you would need to have a Docker Hub credential. Docker Hub, as you would know, is nothing but a repository where all the Docker images can be found. In order to use any one of these images, or not all the images need Docker Hub sign up, but at least if you were to use a lot of these Docker images, you're better off by signing up for this Docker Hub, where you can not just pull images, you can also push the images that you have built here. So having a Docker Hub credential goes without saying that is probably one of the prerequisites. So go to hub.docker.com and just try to accept all the cookies, then go ahead and try to register yourself. Just like any other registration, it needs a unique username. A username is nothing but a kind of an handle which has to be unique. It's a combination of few characters and with some numbers and with some sort of delimiters within that. Okay, after that, specify your whatever is your personal email ID, and then the password is meant for the username that you are specifying here. It's a Docker Hub password that you're going to type in here. And then if you get into the next page, it's going to ask you a couple of questions as to who are you and what is the purpose of using Docker. So if you're just a learner like me who wants to learn a lot of things on Docker, you can possibly put up saying that you are a freelancer or a student and then sign up for a free registration. So you would get an email to whatever is the email that you specified here, just to confirm whether you actually are who you claim to be. So once you verify your email address by clicking on the link, your account would get activated. You will end up having a Docker Hub credential and a password. Most of the time, creating the Docker Hub account happens within a couple of minutes, unless you're unlucky, and then your registration may get held up. But assuming that your registration went through, you have an username, either the short username or the email address, and the specific password to your Docker Hub account. So with that, if you come back here and says, play with Docker, click on the Docker. It's going to throw up a page where it's going to ask you, give me your user Docker Hub credential. So I'm going to type in my short ID, and then I hope I remember my password. This is my password. And if everything goes well, I get logged in to this utility. And then you can just click on the start button. Sometimes, if there is too much of a load on this particular system, the playground tends to be a little slower as it looks like today, but most of the time it's pretty fast. And then you can pretty much, even sometimes when you create on an instance or you try to add a new instance, it may take some time. But otherwise, most of the time, this happens pretty fast. All right. So now, if I were to have a Docker instance, kind of a shared Docker instance on the web, all that I got to do is click on this add new instance and I get an instance. So for the next almost less than, a little bit less than 4 hours, I can pretty much play and run this particular commands, all my Docker commands on this environment. Alt enter will give me the full screen. And if at all I say, who am I? It's a root. And if at all I say Docker, rather Docker version, it will tell me that the latest and the greatest version of Docker, which is 20.10.17, and that too the Docker Community Edition. This is available for me for the next 4 hours to play around. Let's say in case I just want to pull down an image, it's pretty simple. I would just say Docker pull, let's say Nginx. Nginx is one of the most popularly used Docker image, which works as a HTTP kind of a server. So in no time, I was able to pull this image. And if at all I say Docker images, this image shows up here. And if at all I run a container, Docker run hyphen daemon hyphen p, let me open up port 8080. Let me link it to the internal port 80 and Nginx. If you see here, the Docker container started, and which is powered by Nginx, and I'd opened up port 8080, which actually links into the port 80 of my image. And if you see here, I get a new link with the actual port, whatever I opened up. If I click on this and say open on a new link in a new window, you see this? I'm actually getting into my container, the Nginx container. So in no time, after the registration, I was able to log in here and spin up, a container, not just one container, a couple of containers, whatever containers that you would want, along with the port openings. Everything is possible to be run in this environment. If at all you would say, I want to run Docker run hyphen itd, and I want to run Alpine. In Alpine, I want to run the shell script. All right, Docker ps Alpine is running. Docker, oops, let me clear the screen. Okay, Docker, let's say attach to my amazing, what is my Nginx amazing, oops, not my Nginx, I want to attach to my Alpine container. Interesting. All right, now if you see here, I'm right inside my Alpine container. So ps commands here, who am I, all these works well within the container, and if at all I do an exit, probably the container would also disappear. So pretty much for the next almost 4 hours, I can pretty much use this environment to spin up and play around with whatever Docker commands that I've learned so far. That was about starting a simplistic few containers well within a single Docker engine. So if at all I were to get rid of this, I can always say delete. so that whatever sandbox that I was using kind of goes away. And if I click on the templates, you see here, there's a bunch of other templates as well, which are available on the fly. Okay, a Docker swarm with one manager and one worker. All right, 5 managers and no workers. Not sure if that is of much help, but then 3 managers and 2 workers. A bunch of pre-configured templates are available for you. Again, with just that simple login, you don't really have to do anything more. Let's say that I was going to start one manager and one worker. So this is as good as spinning up a Docker swarm, because these Docker engines or the Docker machines are up on the web. I don't really know their public IPs or anything of that sort. Connecting all of them becomes a little problematic. So this guy, well within his cluster, he's able to spin up 2 nodes here. Now one is called the manager, other one is called the worker. So both of them are connected in a pre-configured Docker swarm. So if at all I say I clear the screen, or I say I'll have to go to the manager to try out any of the command. If you know Docker Swarm, probably you know that by now. So if I say Docker node ls, there are 2 nodes that are connected in the swarm. I can pretty much go and maybe start a service out here. If I have the command to start one of the service, Control Shift V, Docker service create. I'm going to create a service. The name is called vote. Replicas is going to be 4. Opening up some ports, and then the image insta vote /vote movies. Some specific version of this particular software. And if you see here, the port 80 automatically open, and then in the background these replicas are still coming up. But if you see here, if I just click on this, some version of the service already came up, maybe with 1 replica, 2 replica, but at the end of maybe a minute, less than a minute, you have 4 replicas of the service up and running. If at all I say Docker service ps vote, it will tell me where are these service, or where are these containers, the 4 replicas of these containers that are running. You'll find 2 running on the manager, 2 running on the worker. So if you know Docker Swarm, you can pretty much play around with all these commands. Maybe kill a particular container, stop a particular container, or remove a particular container, or if at all you want, scale up the service. Docker service scale vote equal to, make it 7. I got the command wrong. So Docker service scale vote equal to any number that we would want, let's say 7. So all the goodness that is provided by Docker Swarm is available for you with this play with Docker. And probably one last thing that I'm going to try out is how to update this service. So Docker service update image, I'm going to change the image from whatever movies to another thing called indent. The tag of the service, whatever image was running. So Control Shift V. All right. So in no time, you will find a rolling update happening. Now, this is the goodness of the Docker Swarm, where the services that are up and running would all get patched one by one. So if at all I keep clicking on this stuff, if you see here, I'm already reached the newer one. Earlier, if you remember, it was movies. So maybe till the time this complete patching happens, you'll probably find some discrepancy in some of them hitting the movies tabs and other one the tabs. But in no time, the 7 replicas or 7 copies or the 7 containers would have their images updated. So all the goodness that you expect from Docker Swarm available to you in this particular UI. All right, now done with our exercise with Docker Swarm. Now running all these commands, remembering the commands, a little bit of a painful thing. So let me go back and create a new instance, and let me demonstrate the usage of a UI. Something very, very similar to a Docker desktop. This is called Portainer, okay? Portainer install on Docker. So you search for this, you're going to find a page that talks about right, want to accept it. Okay, to accept it. All right, so how do you deploy or how do you install? This is, no longer anything called installation when it comes to the Docker world. It's all about if that image is available as a Docker image, pull and run. All right, so create a volume, and then there are two editions. One is the business edition, which needs a sort of a licensing. Community edition is pretty good for us. So I will copy this Docker volume create a volume, Control Shift V. All right, I want to create a volume, and then there's a command how to run Portainer, which I've already copied here. Take a look at it. Docker run, two ports are required. Spin up a container with a name called Portainer, restart it always in case if there's any failure or something like that. Open up the socket of this particular Docker engine to link it to a volume so that Portainer, which runs as a Docker container, can communicate with the Docker engine. And then this volume is for linking the user IDs and other things that we create. And then this is the image that we have bundled. I'm going to add something called HTTP enabled, because sometimes I've had issues with the self-signed certificates, because this container, the Portainer container comes up on HTTPS, and sometimes the self-signed certificates don't get accepted. So let me copy this whole command and let me spin up a Docker container which is powered by this image called Portainer, and that too community edition. So what this Portainer does is it brings up a beautiful container and with very nice UI. All right, now if you see here, two ports are open, 9443 and 800. Let me open up 9443. Or this is because it sent an HTTP request. Our thing is available on HTTPS. All right, I don't like this. All right, advanced. This is a problem with my Kaspersky. Oops, where is my, okay. All right, proceed here. This is a self-signed certificate which is not authenticated. That is why it's going to throw up all this, and even my Kaspersky is going to warn me about it. But I know that I need to use this. All right. So if you see here, the first time the Portainer comes up, the default username is admin. The password could be anything. You got to set the password. The only problem is that it has to be 12 characters long. So let me try to type in a few characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's good. Let me repeat that. All right. And say login. All right. Get started. And if you see here, there's a local environment. Just click on this, and there you will see all information that you want regarding the local Docker engine. So there's one container running, and the name of this container, the statistics and all that. So now, because we didn't have too many things that we have launched here, let's say I want to launch a new container, add a container. The name of my container, my help container. All right, Docker Hub registry is good. What is the image name? Let me say Alpine. And all right, I want interactive, I want TTY, all this stuff that I would want. That's about it. Go ahead and deploy the container. Typically what this guy is doing in the background is he's firing a Docker command using the Docker APIs through which he's connected to my Docker host. He's going to fire a bunch of commands, and Docker host or the Docker engine understands these commands. And if you see here, my Alp container kind of came up. And if you go back to your Docker playground here, and if you see Docker PS, earlier there was only one container running. Now you see here, this Alpine container just got started through this particular UI. And pretty much whatever you would want to do with all your Docker command. Let's say you want to look at the statistics, what is the CPU memory usage of this particular container, or you want to maybe latch onto the container, you want to attach to the container, so that you go and type in. It's as good as attaching, running the Docker attach commands, ps, whom I, all these well within the Docker container. All right, now pretty much whatever you would want to do, you don't like this container, do you want to stop it, go on and just say stop the container. Pretty much whatever you can do with the command line and a lot more can all be done using this beautiful UI called Portainer. A very, very good alternative for Docker desktop. I hope you found both this tutorial useful, and as usual, if you run into any issues, if you need some help, kindly leave a message in the comment section and I'll try to address it as soon as I can. Thanks a lot for stopping by and watching my tutorial. Have a great day.